I'm Jennifer Williams, and my hands trembled as I stood in the marble foyer of my husband's best friend's penthouse. Daniel had just demanded I apologize to Victoria Ashford for questioning her success, for suggesting her luxury lifestyle didn't add up. Apologize or I'll divorce you, he'd said. So I agreed. I looked at Victoria across her designer living room, took in her $3,000 Chanel handbag, her silk dress, and felt something cold settle in my chest. This apology would cost her everything she'd built on lies. Let me tell you how 18 months of gaslighting taught me exactly when to stop being polite. I'm a graphic designer, 32 years old, with middle-class values. Daniel and I met 6 years ago at an art gallery. What I loved was his groundedness. Reliable sedan, happy with pizza, content building a real life rather than performing one. Our first 4 years felt solid. Then Victoria Ashford moved back 18 months ago. Daniel came home with visible excitement. His college friend Victoria was returning after years in pharmaceutical sales. Massive success, he explained. Top tier, incredible penthouse, constant travel. Her social media showed designer clothes, exclusive restaurants, luxury handbags, five-star hotels. When I met Victoria at dinner, she was polished and confident. She and Daniel fell into easy rhythm. Her husband, Richard, a wealth manager, seemed content to observe with a guarded expression. Boundary violations started 3 weeks later. Daniel gave Victoria our apartment key without asking. I came home one Tuesday to find Victoria on our couch. My internet went down, she said. Daniel said I could work here. When I suggested she text first, Daniel's response was immediate. She's going through a difficult transition. Real friends don't put conditions on support. That became the template. Victoria texted constantly during meals, called with work emergencies, showed up with expensive gifts that made mine feel inadequate. Daniel began comparing me unfavorably. Why can't you be more ambitious? Victoria knows how to present herself. You're talented, but don't showcase it. My freelance work was dismissed as cute. My office was provincial. My relationships were limited compared to her network. 6 months in, Victoria borrowed my office. When I returned, she'd rearranged everything and added expensive items: designer lamp, ergonomic chair, motivational prints. Daniel praised her gift. I felt invaded. Victoria started taking Daniel to exclusive events I wasn't invited to. Business contacts only, he explained. She posted photos making them look like a power couple. Our 5th anniversary arrived in September. I'd made reservations months in advance. I wore the emerald dress Daniel loved. We made it halfway through appetizers before Victoria's calls started. Once, twice, 5 times. Daniel was barely present, eyes on his phone while I became invisible. Daniel, it's our anniversary, I said quietly. He looked up confused. Victoria's having a crisis. She needs support right now. That night, lying beside my sleeping husband, I finally admitted it. My marriage had 3 people in it, and I was the least important. 4 months ago, something shifted. A new client, financial analyst Rebecca Chen, mentioned her work helping divorce attorneys assess financial deception. People present themselves one way publicly, while their actual situation tells a different story. I've become good at reading between the lines of luxury presentations. That phrase stuck. I started paying attention. At a dinner party Victoria hosted, I noticed her Hermes handbag had stitching that wasn't quite right. A very good fake. Then her Louboutin heels, soles slightly wrong. Her Cartier bracelet had a clasp that looked off. I began researching using my design skills. Her luxury Santorini vacation? Reverse image searching revealed a budget hotel inland, then drove to expensive resorts for photos. Her exclusive restaurant posts? Timestamps showed lunch prices, posted later as expensive dinners. But I needed concrete proof. Then my laptop died. 3 weeks ago, working on a critical project with an end-of-day deadline, my screen went black. Daniel's laptop sat in our second bedroom. He'd said I could use it. I grabbed it, logged into cloud storage, worked frantically. About an hour in, I needed our tax files. That's when I saw it. A folder labeled Victoria Research. My heart pounded. I clicked it open. Inside were dozens of documents, property records, credit reports, court filings, social media spreadsheets. Daniel had been researching Victoria for over a year. Property records showed Victoria's penthouse was rented for $4,500 monthly from Richard's family trust. Credit reports showed $180,000 in debt, several cards in collections. Court records showed a settled lawsuit involving falsified sales reports. Employment records showed performance improvement for missing targets. Her success was fabricated. Bank statements showed Richard transferring huge sums to cover Victoria's spending. Luxury leases, designer shopping, expensive restaurants, all funded by Richard. Then I found the file labeled Confrontation Plan, dated 2 weeks ago. The most recent entry from 10 days ago made my blood run cold. Realized I can't destroy Victoria without destroying what she represents to me. Her success, even if fake, gave me something to aspire to. Exposing her means admitting I've been worshiping an illusion. Better to keep the fantasy intact. Jennifer's jealousy is actually more convenient. I can blame her rather than face that I've invested in someone fraudulent. Daniel knew Victoria was a fraud. He'd known for over a year, but he'd chosen to keep worshiping the illusion and using my legitimate concerns as a weapon. He'd gaslit me for 18 months while knowing I was right. Something broke inside me. I spent 2 hours copying everything to a USB drive. Daniel came home oblivious. Victoria was hosting a success celebration Saturday, he said enthusiastically. She just closed a major deal. I nodded, knowing the deal had fallen through. Friday evening, Daniel sat me down with visible agitation. Victoria complained that I'd questioned her success story. Jennifer, this has to stop. Your jealousy of Victoria is out of control. She's been generous, and you repay her with constant suspicion. He crossed his arms. Apologize to Victoria tomorrow night, in front of everyone. A real apology where you acknowledge your jealousy and commit to being supportive. And if I don't, then I need to seriously reconsider this marriage. I won't stay with someone who can't respect my friendships. The silence was absolute. Daniel stood there believing he held all power. He had no idea what he'd just handed me. I'd been wrestling with how to expose Victoria without seeming vindictive. Daniel just gave me the perfect stage, audience, and justification. Fine, Daniel. I'll apologize tomorrow night, but I want Richard there too. If I'm apologizing properly, I want both spouses present. Daniel's expression shifted to surprised relief. Really? Absolutely. Schedule it. Make sure Richard is there. Daniel smiled and pulled out his phone. I watched him relax, felt nothing but cold determination. He had no idea that tomorrow night I would deliver an apology that would shatter Victoria's facade, expose his complicity, and end our marriage in a way that finally forced truth into light. They wanted an apology? They would get one. If this story hits home, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Every betrayal I share comes with a twist you won't see coming. Let me take you back further to help you understand how I became someone who could speak devastating truth without flinching. That capacity was built through years of watching my parents navigate the world with unflinching honesty. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood where pretension was quickly identified and quietly mocked. My father worked as a civil engineer, my mother as a teacher. They took enormous pride in creating genuine value rather than performing success. When I was 12, a wealthy woman moved onto our street and made dismissive comments about teachers at a neighborhood gathering. My mother responded calmly. Success is measured by impact, not appearance. I shape young minds. You decorate your life with expensive things and mistake that for achievement. They aren't the same thing. That lesson stayed with me. Truth delivered with calm conviction cuts deeper than anger. My parents were proud when I built my freelance business from nothing. I started taking small projects and delivering exceptional work that led to referrals. By the time I met Daniel, my business was thriving sustainably. I worked with clients who valued creativity over flash, charged fair rates, built relationships based on genuine value. Daniel seemed to appreciate that initially, but I realized later he'd always carried insecurity about not being impressive enough. Victoria was the catalyst that activated those feelings fully. When she returned with her curated presentation of luxury success, she represented everything Daniel secretly wished he was. Those first months after Victoria's return marked systematic changes in how Daniel treated me. It started subtly. Victoria would mention her Penthouse hosted pharmaceutical executives. Daniel would comment, "Our apartment felt cramped and modest." The implication, our home was inadequate, measured against Victoria's impressive address. Victoria posted photos from exclusive restaurants. Daniel suggested I should make more effort with my appearance. Never mind that I worked from home. In Daniel's evolving worldview, I was falling short of the standard Victoria represented. Victoria completely redecorated my office without asking. Daniel praised her thoughtfulness and understanding of what a professional workspace should look like. When I objected, Daniel positioned me as ungrateful and too stubborn to appreciate help. That became Daniel's pattern. Every boundary Victoria crossed was reframed as generous help I was too limited to appreciate. Every objection I raised was evidence of my inability to accept support. The networking events started around month 9. Victoria invited Daniel to exclusive business dinners where pharmaceutical executives and partners socialized. Daniel attended without including me. "These are business contacts only," he said. "Victoria needs support, and I'm helping her network." But married men don't attend couple-style dinners with another woman while excluding their wives. Victoria posted photos from every event, her hand on Daniel's arm, looking like an attractive, successful couple. Friends started asking if everything was okay. The questions humiliated me because they forced me to acknowledge that my husband's behavior had become publicly questionable. When I discussed this with Daniel, he became defensive. People are reading too much into a professional friendship. If people want to gossip, that says more about them than us. Around month 12, Victoria complained about her marriage to Richard during visits. She'd talk for hours about feeling disconnected from him, missing emotional connection with people who understood her ambitions. Daniel became her emotional partner while Richard provided financial support, and I became the inconvenient wife objecting to their intimacy. Our anniversary dinner was the breaking point I didn't yet recognize. I'd planned everything carefully, wore the dress Daniel loved. Instead, I watched him provide emotional support to Victoria while I sat invisible on what should have been our most important night. The final months before I found Daniel's research files were marked by escalating dismissiveness of me compared to constant praise of Victoria. Our apartment was too modest. My business was limited. My professional approach was unsophisticated. all compared to Victoria's fabricated success that Daniel couldn't see past. 2 months before discovering Daniel's files, Victoria hosted an elaborate dinner celebrating what she claimed was a record-breaking sales quarter. The dinner was catered with expensive food and wine. Victoria wore a designer dress and expensive jewelry. I started noticing details that didn't add up. Her handbag had wrong stitching. Her heels had wrong red soles. Small tells suggesting very good fakes. I also noticed Richard's strained expression throughout the evening, like someone carrying a heavy burden. During dinner, I made a casual comment questioning one of Victoria's sales figures. The numbers seemed inconsistent with typical industry contracts. Victoria's smile froze briefly. Then she laughed and suggested I was misremembering. But Daniel noticed, and his disappointment was immediate. That small interaction set off the chain leading to Daniel's ultimatum. Victoria complained I was undermining her. Daniel decided to force me into public submission to validate his choice to prioritize her. And in doing so, he handed me exactly the opportunity to expose the truth neither wanted to face. The week between Daniel's ultimatum and Victoria's dinner moved in suspended time. Daniel coached me repeatedly on what to say, emphasizing phrases like, "I was wrong," and "I'm intimidated by your achievements." Meanwhile, I organized all the evidence methodically, created a presentation with photos, documents, and data showing the progression of Victoria's deception, cross-referenced her social media with public records, documented fake luxury items and edited posts. On Friday evening, I called Richard. My finger hovered over the call button before I gathered courage. He answered on the second ring. "This is Richard. Richard, it's Jennifer. I'm calling because Daniel has insisted I attend Victoria's dinner tomorrow to apologize publicly. I wanted to make sure you'll be there." There was a long pause. When he spoke, his voice had changed, become more alert. "I'll be there. Thank you. I think there are some things you should know, things you might have suspected but didn't have proof of." The silence was heavy with recognition. Finally, Richard spoke quietly. "Thank you for calling me. You deserve to know the truth. We both do. I'll be there tomorrow," he repeated. "And Jennifer, whatever you're planning to say, I'm ready to hear it." We hung up. Daniel came home that evening in excellent mood. He'd talked with Victoria, who was grateful I'd agreed to apologize. "This is going to be so good for all our relationships," he said warmly. I nodded, reviewing my evidence while Daniel chatted about new beginnings. Saturday morning, Daniel reminded me to prepare what to say. He suggested writing it out to cover all important points. Acknowledge my jealousy. Admit I'd misinterpreted their friendship. Thank Victoria for her patience. Express gratitude she was giving me another chance. I agreed to everything, letting him believe I was preparing humble submission. By Saturday evening, as we drove to Victoria's penthouse, Daniel was radiating satisfaction. His wife problem was solved. Life would return to comfortable patterns where I accepted secondary position without complaint. But they had no idea I'd spent 3 days organizing irrefutable evidence of Victoria's fabricated life. This apology would expose every lie Victoria had built on, and it would force Daniel to acknowledge he'd been worshiping expensive illusion while sacrificing his real marriage for comfortable fantasy. Saturday evening arrived with unseasonably warm October weather. Daniel and I left our apartment at 6:15 for the drive to Victoria's penthouse. He insisted we arrive together, presenting a united front. I sat in the passenger seat wearing a simple navy dress. In my purse, carefully organized on my tablet, sat evidence that would shatter Victoria's facade and end my marriage. Daniel drove with barely contained excitement, talking about how meaningful this evening would be, how proud he was of me for being mature enough to work through my issues, how our marriage would be stronger. I watched familiar streets slide past, families out enjoying the evening. Everything looked so normal. None of these people knew that in one building, multiple lives were about to detonate. "You're quiet," Daniel observed. "Are you nervous?" "Just thinking about what I want to say," I replied truthfully. "I want to get everything right." He squeezed my knee reassuringly. "It'll be fine. Just speak from your heart. This is going to be a new beginning." I let him believe that for 20 more minutes. We arrived at Victoria's building at 6:40, expensive high-rise with marble lobby. Daniel parked, and we walked through to the elevator. His hand was on my lower back in what he thought was supportive guidance. We rode up in silence. I focused on breathing steadily, keeping my expression neutral, and maybe slightly anxious. Daniel watched me in the mirrored walls, trying to assess whether I'd actually go through with his scripted apology. Victoria's penthouse was at the end of the hallway. Through the door I could hear music, could see lights blazing. Victoria had staged this evening carefully for receiving submission. Daniel rang the doorbell. Victoria opened it before the chime finished, her smile wide and barely concealing smugness. She looked perfect. Designer jeans, cream silk blouse, professionally styled hair, flawless makeup. She dressed like someone expecting to be photographed as the gracious Victor. "Daniel, Jennifer, come in," she said warmly. "I'm so glad we're doing this. Clearing the air will be good for all of us." Daniel handed her expensive wine. Victoria made appreciative noises, then set it aside next to a handbag I now recognized as a very good fake Chanel. Richard appeared from the living room. Our eyes met, and I saw everything. He was alert, watchful, braced for impact. Unlike Daniel and Victoria, he was prepared for discomfort. "Jennifer, Daniel," he said neutrally. Then his eyes found mine again briefly, and I saw acknowledgement, recognition, gratitude. We moved into the living room. Victoria's penthouse was staged perfectly: marble flooring, floor-to-ceiling windows, designer furniture. The coffee table held wine glasses already poured, an expensive cheese board, perfectly positioned plates, and napkins. Victoria had created the perfect setting for receiving apology and submission. Victoria and Richard settled on their gray sectional with subtle space between them, suggesting distance in their marriage. Daniel and I took armchairs across from them, a glass coffee table between us. The lighting was bright, theatrical, making the space feel like a stage where we were all actors. Except, only I knew the real plot. Daniel settled with visible satisfaction. This was his victory, too. He gave me an encouraging nod, radiating barely contained excitement. Victoria folded her hands with gracious expectation. Perfect posture, carefully arranged magnanimous expression. Ready to receive contrition and accept apology with generous spirit. Richard leaned back, arms crossed loosely, watching with focused intensity. He was the only person besides me who understood something was about to shift dramatically. The air felt heavy with anticipation. Victoria's staging, Daniel's confidence, Richard's tense awareness, creating pressure that made my next words feel weighted with significance. I took a deliberate breath, set down my wine glass. The sound seemed unnaturally loud. I pulled my tablet from my purse, opened to the first evidence page, and looked directly at Victoria. Victoria. I want to start by saying that Daniel was absolutely right. I paused deliberately. Victoria's smile widened slightly. Daniel's posture relaxed fractionally. I do owe you an apology. Another pause. Victoria's shoulders dropped. This was going exactly as expected. Daniel smiled, pleased with himself. But not for the reasons you think. The atmosphere shifted dramatically. Daniel's smile faltered and froze. Victoria's expression transformed to cautious uncertainty. Richard leaned forward, every muscle alert. I continued in that same calm, measured voice. I apologize for staying silent when I should have spoken up 18 months ago. I apologize to Richard, actually, because he deserves to know the truth about the woman he's been financially supporting while she builds a fake empire on his family's money and her own massive hidden debt. Victoria started to interrupt, but I raised my hand. Let me finish. You demanded an apology, Daniel. I'm giving you one. The real one you should have been honest enough to demand from yourself. Richard's face went completely still. His eyes moved to Victoria with an expression combining devastation with something like relief. I turned my tablet so Richard could see. The first image showed property records with highlighted text showing the rental agreement in Richard's name. This beautiful penthouse? Public records show it's rented for $4,500 monthly, paid entirely from Richard's family trust account. But you tell everyone you bought it with pharmaceutical success, Victoria. You post photos with captions about hard work paying off. It's all funded by Richard's family money, while you claim to be self-made. Victoria's mouth opened and closed. No words came. Daniel was standing now, voice rising with panic. Jennifer, what are you doing? This isn't what we agreed. I ignored Daniel and scrolled to credit reports showing Victoria's massive debt. Should we discuss the $180,000 in credit card debt you've hidden from Richard, Victoria? I have public court records from property liens filed 3 months ago. Some accounts in collections for over a year. How did you... Victoria's voice came out strangled. Richard, this isn't what it looks like. Richard took my tablet with trembling hands. I watched his eyes move across the screen. The color drained from his face completely. But his hands kept moving, kept scrolling, methodically reviewing evidence. How long? Richard's voice cut through Victoria's stammering like a blade. Cold, controlled, more devastating than shouting. He was still scrolling, reading documented proof of deception. He was still looking at my tablet when I scrolled to court documents from Victoria's previous employer. Should we talk about why you left your previous pharmaceutical job? The settlement documents are public record. Something about falsified sales reports and ethical violations? You tell everyone you left for better opportunities, but you were fired after investigation revealed you'd been fabricating sales numbers for over a year. Daniel was pacing now, movements jerky. This can't be real. Victoria, tell them this is out of context. Jennifer's jealousy has blown everything out of proportion. But his voice lacked conviction. He could see documented evidence on the tablet Richard held. He could see Victoria's composure crumbling. And somewhere beneath denial, he had to remember the research files on his own laptop. It says here you bought her a designer scarf for her birthday, Richard said quietly, reading email receipts. $250, expensive wine for her promotion, flowers sent to her office. He looked up at Victoria. You told me those flowers were from a grateful client. Victoria's tears were flowing freely. Elijah, I can explain. How much? Richard cut her off. How much money has Mason spent on you over 3 years while telling me we needed to be more careful with our budget? I stood slowly, smoothing my dress and picking up my purse, while Daniel continued desperate explanations to an audience that had stopped listening. Time to leave, to walk away from the explosion and let it burn through whatever remained. I looked at Daniel directly. You demanded I apologize for speaking truth. I just did. You told me to do it in front of Richard. Done. You threatened me with divorce if I didn't comply. Well, Daniel, consider this my answer to that threat. Then I turned to Richard. I've sent you copies of everything to your email address, all the screenshots, all the financial records, all the evidence you need. You deserve to know the truth, and I'm genuinely sorry I didn't tell you sooner. Daniel grabbed my arm, gripped tight enough to hurt. You can't just walk out. We need to talk about this. You're my wife. We can work through this if you just calm down. I pulled my arm free. No, Daniel. You need to talk to your lawyer because I'm done being the understanding wife in a marriage where you've been worshiping fake success for 18 months while knowing the entire time that Victoria was a fraud. I'm done being gaslit by someone who chose comfortable lies over uncomfortable truth. I'm done. I walked toward the door without looking back. Behind me, Victoria sobbed, her composure destroyed. Richard's cold questions continued, controlled fury underneath. Daniel made increasingly desperate attempts to salvage something from wreckage. But none of it was my problem anymore. I stepped out into the hallway and closed the door, muffling sounds of their imploding lives. The hallway was quiet, peaceful, completely at odds with devastation I'd just left behind. I walked to the elevator with shaking hands but steady purpose. Called a rideshare. The driver arrived within 8 minutes. I climbed into the back seat and spent the entire ride staring out at suburban streets and lit windows, people living normal evenings unaware that in one building, 4 lives had just detonated. Part of me wondered if I should feel guilty. But mostly, I felt relieved, like I'd finally stopped carrying a crushing weight. When the rideshare dropped me off, I walked through the lobby feeling like I was moving through a different world than the one I'd left that morning. I unlocked our door and stepped inside. The space felt different immediately, lighter, less suffocating. Daniel's things were everywhere, but they all felt temporary now, like artifacts from a life that had already ended. I poured myself wine, sat on our couch in the quiet apartment, and let myself feel the full weight of what came next. I sat on that couch nursing my wine and waiting in the quiet apartment. The silence felt strange after 18 months of Victoria's constant intrusions, her loud presence, and expensive performances that had filled our space and our marriage with noise designed to drown out truth. Now, in the absence of all that fabricated drama, I could finally hear my own thoughts clearly. Part of me wondered if Daniel would come home at all that night, or if he'd stay at Victoria and Richard's penthouse, trying to salvage what remained of the fantasy relationship that had just been exposed in all its hollow reality. But some deeper instinct told me he'd come back. Men like Daniel always came back to try one more time to control the narrative, to reframe their behavior as somehow justified or misunderstood. His key turned in the lock at 11:47. I'd been watching the clock, noting each passing hour, existing in that strange suspended state between exhaustion and hyper-awareness. The door opened and Daniel walked in. The man who entered our apartment looked nothing like the confident husband who'd left it 5 hours earlier. His face was ravaged, eyes red and swollen from what must have been crying. His hair stood up in places where he'd clearly been running his hands through it repeatedly. His shirt was wrinkled and partially untucked. He looked like someone who'd aged 10 years in an evening. He stood in the doorway staring at me for a long moment. Then he closed the door behind him with careful control, and walked into the living room. The look on his face was something I'd never seen before. Equal parts devastation and fury, grief and rage, all competing for dominance. "How could you do that?" His voice came out raw. "How could you humiliate me like that? Destroy my friendship with Victoria? Share information you had no right to access in the first place? Do you understand what you've done? You've destroyed 2 marriages because you couldn't handle me having a close friendship." I took another sip of wine and said nothing. I'd said everything that needed saying at Victoria's penthouse. Now it was Daniel's turn to deal with consequences. He started pacing, his movements jerky and agitated. "You violated my privacy by going through my research files. You weaponized private information to hurt people. You exposed things that should have stayed private. This was vindictive and cruel, Jennifer. This wasn't about truth or honesty. This was about you getting revenge because you've been jealous of Victoria from the moment I introduced you." I let him pace and rant for 20 minutes, cycling through accusations about my jealousy and vindictiveness. Then he shifted strategies, sitting down on the armchair across from me with his elbows on his knees, hands clasped together in a posture that suggested vulnerability and remorse. "Look, I know I made mistakes," he said, his voice softer now. "Maybe I didn't set appropriate boundaries with Victoria. Maybe I let our friendship cross lines that made you uncomfortable. But we can work through this, Jennifer. We can go to couples therapy. I'll cut contact with Victoria completely if that's what you need. Whatever it takes. Our marriage is worth fighting for." This was textbook. Deny, deflect, attack, then bargain when those tactics failed. Make promises of change that would never materialize because they came from desperation rather than genuine transformation. I set down my wine glass and looked at him directly. "Daniel, I'm filing for divorce." His face went through rapid evolution of expressions, shock first, as if he genuinely hadn't considered that possibility, then calculation, probably running through damage control options, then manipulation, his features arranging themselves into wounded confusion. "You're overreacting," he said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I'd come to recognize so well. "You're emotional right now, understandably, but destroying our marriage over this isn't the answer. You're letting your feelings about Victoria ruin something good. This is exactly what I've been trying to help you work through. Your inability to handle my having friendships outside our marriage." And there it was. Even caught with irrefutable evidence of his knowing complicity in Victoria's deception, even confronted with proof that he'd gaslit me for 18 months while documenting that I was right to be suspicious, Daniel was still trying to make this my failing, my overreaction, my emotional instability, my inability to handle mature adult friendships. I stood up and walked to our bedroom without another word. Closed and locked the door behind me, creating physical barrier between myself and Daniel's continued manipulation. I heard him call after me, heard him try the door handle, heard him spend another hour pacing the living room before finally settling on the couch. The next morning, he tried yet another approach. The wounded husband who just wanted to save his marriage. He called in sick to work and spent the entire day following me around our apartment, trying to initiate conversations about rebuilding trust and moving forward together. But I was done. Done fighting, done explaining, done accepting blame for other people's deceptions. I'd spoken truth in that penthouse, exposed lies that needed to be confronted, and now I was moving forward into whatever life waited on the other side of this marriage. On Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after I detonated multiple lives at Victoria's penthouse, I called a divorce attorney whose name I'd gotten from a professional contact. Victoria Brennan had a reputation for being thorough and completely unsympathetic to spouses who tried to manipulate proceedings through gaslighting. Her office was downtown, in a modern building with floor-to-ceiling windows. Victoria Brennan herself was in her mid-50s, professionally dressed with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Our consultation lasted 2 hours. I showed her everything. Daniel's research files proving he'd known Victoria was a fraud. My own documentation. The timeline of his gaslighting and manipulation. The evidence of how he'd prioritized his emotional relationship with Victoria over our marriage. Ms. Brennan reviewed everything with focused intensity. When she finished, she gave me her frank assessment. We can absolutely use this to build a strong case. Your husband deliberately maintained a relationship he knew was based on deception while making you feel inadequate. That's emotional abuse through gaslighting. We'll file for divorce on grounds of emotional cruelty and push for a favorable settlement. I hired her immediately. 2 days after that consultation, I received an email that surprised me. The sender was Richard, and the subject line was simply, "Thank you." The message explained that Richard had filed for divorce the Monday after our confrontation. He wrote about years of suspecting something was wrong, but convincing himself he was being paranoid, that Victoria's behavior was explainable even when his instincts screamed otherwise. My apology had given him both validation and proof. The evidence I'd provided made it impossible for Victoria to deny or minimize what had been happening. He asked if we could meet for coffee sometime, carefully clarifying that it wasn't romantic or complicated. He just wanted to talk with someone who understood exactly what it felt like to be made to question your own perceptions, while your spouse maintained an inappropriate relationship funded by your money and built on lies. I agreed to meet him. We sat in a small downtown cafe the following Wednesday afternoon. Two people who'd survived similar betrayals in parallel marriages. Richard looked different than I'd ever seen him. The resigned exhaustion that had always characterized his expression was gone, replaced by something more solid and present. Our conversation flowed easily. There was no need for pretense or performance. We'd both already been publicly humiliated in the same living room, had both discovered that our instincts had been right all along, despite years of being told we were the problem. Richard told me about watching Victoria's face light up when Daniel called or texted, about expressing discomfort with their relationship and being told he was too controlling, too jealous, unable to handle his wife having close friendships, about the slow erosion of trust that happens when someone constantly makes you doubt your own perceptions while maintaining they're doing nothing wrong. It was like listening to my own experiences reflected back from a different angle. We'd been living parallel nightmares, both gaslit by people who prioritize their emotional fantasy over their actual marriages. Through mutual contacts over the following weeks, I learned that Daniel and Victoria tried to make a real relationship work after both our divorces were filed. The predictability of it was almost amusing. Once their connection was no longer forbidden or secret, once they had to deal with actual relationship logistics instead of fantasy emotional intimacy, it collapsed under the weight of mundane reality. They lasted exactly 3 months. Victoria apparently struggled with Daniel's modest income after living on Richard's family money. Daniel discovered that Victoria's constant need for validation, which had seemed flattering when directed at him through carefully curated messages, became exhausting when it was his full-time responsibility. The relationship that had seemed so special and deep when conducted through secret meetings and emotional support phone calls turned out to be mostly illusion built on fantasy rather than substance. They broke up quietly, without the dramatic explosion that had marked the end of their marriages. Just a sad fizzle that proved what I'd suspected all along. What they had wasn't love or genuine connection. It was the thrill of inappropriate intimacy and the validation of being someone's secret priority. Strip away the forbidden element and the performance, and nothing real remained underneath. 6 months after that explosive Saturday night, I sat in Victoria Brennan's downtown office signing final divorce papers. Afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across documents that would legally end my marriage to Daniel. The settlement was more favorable than I'd expected. Daniel agreed to split our savings evenly, let me keep the apartment since the lease was in my name, and even pay half my legal fees. My attorney suspected his unusual generosity came from wanting to end proceedings quickly before more details became public record. His colleagues and family were already asking uncomfortable questions about why his marriage ended. Prolonging the divorce would only invite more scrutiny he couldn't afford. I signed my name on page after page, watching my signature legally transform me back into just Jennifer Williams. Each signature felt like closing a door I'd been trying to shut for months, but kept getting wedged open by Daniel's manipulation. When I signed the last page, Victoria Brennan smiled. "Congratulations. You're officially divorced." I walked out of her office carrying a folder that officially ended one chapter and began another. I'd expected this moment to feel heavier, sadder. Instead, I felt lighter than I had in years, like I'd finally removed a heavy coat I'd been wearing so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to move freely. My coffee meetings with Richard continued throughout the divorce proceedings. What started as mutual support between two people who'd survived similar betrayals gradually evolved into something more complicated and interesting. We discovered shared interests that had nothing to do with our failed marriages. Old films and difficult hiking trails and comfortable silence that didn't need filling with constant conversation. One Wednesday in early spring, Richard suggested we meet for dinner instead of coffee. The way he asked made it clear this was a different kind of invitation, a shift from friendly support to something more intentional. "There's a new Italian place downtown," he said, with slight nervousness. "I thought maybe we could try it together, if you're interested." I looked at this quiet man who'd survived the same betrayal I had, who understood without explanation what it felt like to be gaslit by someone you trusted. We were both carrying damage that would take time to heal, but we'd built something honest between us over months of Wednesday afternoon conversations, a foundation based on truth instead of illusion. "I'd like that," I said. We took things slowly, both aware that trust rebuilds gradually after being thoroughly demolished. But what we were building felt different this time, solid in ways my marriage to Daniel never had been. I ran into Daniel unexpectedly about 8 months after our divorce finalized. I was in the grocery store produce section reaching for organic apples when another hand reached for the same bag at exactly the same moment. We both pulled back, started to apologize, then recognized each other. Daniel looked different, older, more worn, with new lines around his eyes from stress rather than laughter. His hair had more gray. He'd lost weight, but not in a healthy way. We stood there awkwardly for a moment, both holding vegetables we no longer wanted, neither sure what the protocol was for unexpected encounters with ex-spouses in produce sections. "Jennifer," he said finally, "how are you?" I kept my answer simple. "I'm good. Working on interesting design projects, enjoying my life." Daniel nodded. "I'm glad you're doing well." He looked like he wanted to say something more significant, words forming and dissolving before he could speak them. Finally, he managed quietly. "I made a lot of mistakes. I handled everything poorly. I wish I'd listened when you tried to tell me the truth." The apology was real, but came far too late to change anything. I appreciated the acknowledgement, but felt nothing beyond that. No anger anymore, no hurt, just recognition that this was a person I used to know who taught me important lessons. "I appreciate you saying that," I replied. There was a pause. Then Daniel added, "Victoria and I broke up months ago. Turns out what we had didn't work once it wasn't secret anymore. I'm living in a studio across town, working through who I am outside the fantasy I'd been maintaining." We parted cordially after that, both aware that some bridges once burned can never be rebuilt, only acknowledged as part of the landscape that shaped us. Today, I live in a loft apartment that carries no trace of Daniel or our marriage. After the divorce finalized, I moved out of the space we'd shared and found this place in a converted warehouse building downtown. High ceilings and exposed brick walls and huge windows that flood the space with natural light. I redecorated completely, choosing every element to reflect only my taste and preferences. The bookshelves hold novels I actually want to read, rather than impressive titles, meant to signal sophistication. The walls feature artwork from local artists whose work speaks to me. The furniture is arranged for my comfort and creative work, rather than for entertaining people I never wanted to host. The silence here isn't lonely, it's peaceful. The sound of a life reclaimed, of boundaries respected, of truth spoken without apology. My freelance design business has thrived in ways I hadn't expected. After the divorce, I stopped accepting projects that didn't genuinely excite me and started pursuing creative work that challenged my skills. Word spread through professional networks about my authentic approach and genuine talent. Within 6 months, I had more high-quality clients than I could handle. People who valued real expertise over impressive presentations. Last month, a design magazine contacted me about featuring my work in an article about building success on authentic talent rather than performative marketing. The interview focused on how I'd built a sustainable creative business through genuine client relationships and quality work rather than social media presence and fabricated success stories. The contrast with Victoria's approach wasn't lost on me, though I never mentioned her by name. I simply told my story of valuing substance over appearance, of building real success rather than performing impressiveness. The article resonated with readers who were tired of fake success narratives and hungry for authentic achievement stories. Richard and I are still together, though we're taking things slowly. We're both cautious about jumping into serious commitment after having trust demolished in our previous marriages. But what we're building feels different, solid in ways that come from both of us, understanding the value of truth, because we both paid the price for living in lies. We have dinner together twice a week. We take long hikes on trails that require effort to find, but reward us with solitude and views. We sit in comfortable silence, reading separate books in the same room. We talk about our work and interests without performing impressiveness. We're honest about our damage and patient with each other's healing process. Last week, Richard mentioned that he'd seen Victoria at a coffee shop across town. She was working as a sales associate at a retail store, living in a studio apartment. Her entire facade of luxury success completely gone. Her social media accounts had been deleted after former followers started exposing more of her fabricated stories. The pharmaceutical industry had effectively blacklisted her after word spread about the lawsuit and ethical violations. Richard felt no satisfaction in her downfall, just sad recognition that she'd destroyed her own life by choosing expensive illusion over authentic achievement. He'd moved on completely, building a genuine life with real relationships rather than performing success for an audience. I felt similarly when I heard about Victoria's current situation. Not vindication or satisfaction, just understanding that consequences eventually catch people who build their lives on lies. Victoria had every opportunity to build real success through her actual talents and hard work. Instead, she chose to fake wealth and achievement, and that choice eventually cost her everything real she could have had. Daniel occasionally sends me messages through professional networking platforms, brief notes acknowledging his mistakes and expressing regret. I respond politely, but don't engage beyond basic courtesy. He made his choices, prioritized illusion over substance, and now lives with the results. I've moved forward into a life built on truth and authenticity. My parents visited last month and spent an entire afternoon in my new loft. My mother walked through the space studying every detail, then pulled me aside with tears in her eyes. "This is who you really are," she said quietly. "I watched you shrink yourself for years trying to fit into Daniel's vision of who you should be. Now you're finally taking up space as yourself. I'm so proud of you." That comment meant more to me than any professional success or impressive achievement could. Because she was right. For 6 years with Daniel, and especially the last 18 months of Victoria's intrusion, I'd been making myself smaller to accommodate other people's illusions. I'd questioned my own perceptions, doubted my instincts, accepted blame for speaking truth. Now I live entirely as myself. I trust my perceptions. I speak truth even when it makes people uncomfortable. I build my life on authentic relationships and genuine achievement rather than performing impressiveness or maintaining comfortable lies. I think about that night sometimes, standing in Victoria's carefully staged living room, preparing to speak words that would detonate multiple lives. Part of me still wonders if I could have handled it differently, more privately, with less public devastation. But mostly I understand that some truths need to be spoken loudly, need to be witnessed by everyone affected by the lies. Daniel wanted me to apologize publicly for hurting Victoria's feelings, wanted me to submit and validate his choice to prioritize her over me. I gave him exactly what he demanded, just made sure the apology revealed every uncomfortable truth he'd been working so hard to hide. The moral crystallized clearly over these months of rebuilding. Never force an apology from a woman who speaks truth, because women like me don't apologize for seeing clearly. We apologize for staying silent too long. And when we finally speak, we burn down every carefully constructed lie that's been suffocating authentic life. Daniel learned too late that forcing someone to apologize is only a victory if you control what they're apologizing for. I didn't bow for his fantasy or Victoria's fabricated success. I weaponized truth, and in doing so reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is refuse to pretend anymore. Victoria learned that expensive appearances eventually crumble under the weight of their own hollow foundation. You can only fake success for so long before the performance requires more energy than building something real would have taken. She chose illusion and paid for it with everything genuine she could have had. Richard and I learned that some betrayals, while devastating, lead to better things if you're willing to face truth and rebuild on honest foundations. We're both grateful for having met someone who understands exactly what it feels like to be gaslit and manipulated. Someone who values authenticity, because we both survived marriages built on lies. The silence I live in now isn't the silence of submission or acceptance of unacceptable behavior. It's the silence of peace that comes after. You finally stop carrying other people's lies and start living in the clear, bright light of your own truth. If this story of calculated truth and powerful consequences resonated with you, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when I systematically dismantled Victoria's perfect facade with public records and documented evidence while she sat there watching her carefully constructed illusion crumble in real time. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Have you ever known someone whose perfect life was built on expensive lies? Have you ever been made to feel crazy for noticing things that turned out to be absolutely true? Share your story. And remember, real success doesn't need filters, doesn't need constant posting and proving, doesn't need expensive appearances to feel legitimate. The most valuable thing I own isn't designer labels or impressive addresses. It's the capacity to speak truth, even when comfortable lies would be easier. It's the foundation of authentic relationships built on honesty rather than performance. It's a life where I never have to pretend, perform, or apologize for seeing clearly. Daniel demanded I apologize to his wealthy best friend. I delivered an apology that shattered her perfect life and revealed that beneath all the expensive appearances was nothing but debt, deception, and the kind of emptiness that comes from building everything on lies. The best revenge isn't destroying someone's illusion. It's building a life so genuine, so rooted in authentic achievement and honest relationships that you never need to pretend, never need to perform, never need to post proof of your worth. My hands trembled that night in Victoria's marble foyer, but they were steady when I spoke truth that exposed her fabricated success. And they've remained steady ever since, building a real life on authentic foundations rather than expensive illusions. That's my story, that's my apology, that's my truth.